Welcome back to Wandering into Wellness. This episode is called What's the Deal with Raw Milk? In this episode, you're going to hear the history of the controversy with raw milk. Is raw milk really dangerous and going to poison you? What are the health benefits of consuming raw milk and where you can get it from?
So let's get into it. Raw milk, huge controversy. And essentially it was, I think, outright banned as part of human health guidelines in the UK and the EU and Ireland about 25 years ago. But in Ireland, at least, there was a huge campaign. So that from between 2004 and 2011, a lot of our notable food writers, chefs, personalities on TV who cared about and understood the value of raw milk, they made consistent representations to our government, and over time they wore them down. And amazingly, in Ireland, kind of against what is the EU directive, we decided, or the government and hence the Irish people decided, to legitimise the sale of raw milk with some very careful strictures.
So we're like the renegades.
Yeah.
We actually fought and we won. So exciting. But just raw milk's become really trendy now. But it was always trendy. Raw milk was the thing that we always had. And then it disappeared, and now it's come back again. Why did it disappear in the first place?
So I guess the big, to go back to the start, with raw milk, we have, it's part of, like a microcosm of the issues we have with industrialized food, where you have a controlling stake in the food production system that is managed by big conglomerates that want to supply food at a very cheap price, which is what governments want generally, so populations can afford food. And they also want to be able to manage processes such that there is very little human health risk involved in those things. Once you broaden out, once you industrialize the scale of food productions, you necessarily have more risk. So industrial production of raw milk would be a very dangerous paradigm. We don't really think that industrial food production is really good for the health of humanity, or good for the farmers, good for the people eating the food, good for society as a whole. And so the raw milk kind of revolution, as it were, was part of the kind of grassroots real food movement, the sort of re-engineering or a kind of a shift in understanding that, oh, hang on, this kind of perceived progress in food production and food production systems such that we could, like I said, reduce the price of food, standardize what people were getting in terms of looking at the amount of vitamins and minerals in their diet. All these things we began to realize actually they weren't doing us any favors in the long run.
And so it's interesting, isn't it, though, because raw milk would have been the only way that people had milk, and people have consumed milk for generations and generations through the whole of humanity. That's one of the first primary things. Why did we, and everyone, that was it. And then suddenly we changed to this idea that it has to be homogenized, pasteurized, blah, 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 for it to be safe. Why?
So because people can die from having food poisoning, right? So food poisoning can be a mild self-limiting ailment where you have diarrhea or vomiting for, a matter of a number of hours, and you can feel pretty bad afterwards. Or it can be like a serious listeria infection or otherwise where you're hospitalized and in some cases can die. Now, the actual instances of deaths, I think we looked a little bit at the data on this, and in the UK, in a 25-year period between, 1985 and 2000 something, it was 26 people had actually encountered, or there's 26 outbreaks of what was ascribed to raw milk production as a food poisoning outbreak, as opposed to 13 outbreaks that happen from non-raw milk but dairy producing things. So maybe double the risk there for people to get food poisoning from those things, from raw milk, as opposed to industrialized, pasteurized, homogenized milk that is standardized and made safe. The thing is that, only 40 of those people, over 25 years, there was 40 hospitalizations and no deaths. So you look at it's what I would consider, and what people in the natural health paradigm would consider, of using a hammer to crack a nut when we apply broad scale regulation to apply to a small risk. And when we, I guess the kind of general gist of the trajectory in modern society, or society since 40s, 50s, 60s, has been to move us away from risk, move us towards situations where the government are keeping us safe from harm, putting bumpers on the sides of things so that we bounce off things. Oh, I could have hurt myself if I fell over that cliff, but thank God the government put the bumper there. So even though I wasn't looking, I didn't fall over a cliff. It reduces our human necessity to look out for ourselves, to look at our environment and genuinely assess the threats and, actually investigate and apply critical thinking, our own critical thinking. And instead we just trust the government that what's on sale must be safe. Whatever's not on sale must have been dangerous. And cool, life is good. Let's keep eating the Doritos. Or is that right?
It's so strange, isn't it? Because also one of the statistics that we found out was that I can't remember how many more times because I'm rubbish at statistics, but you're much more likely to get food poisoning from deli meat, which is something that people eat continually all the time. Vast swathes of people, more than eat raw milk, are eating deli meat. So it's also about that risk analysis that you were saying, but also a common sense thing, because if we look at raw milk in isolation, they might say, okay, so 24 people were hospitalized or 40 people were hospitalized in this period. And that sounds like, well, from milk, that's not great. But then if you were to see that relative to from meat, from chicken, from McDonald's, from all these things that people consume in vast quantities, that risk is kind of a slightly different thing, isn't it? And also, another factor of this is, like you said, there's risk involved in everything. We eat lettuce from our garden, then dirt can be on it, and we could get food poisoning from it. How many people actually get food poisoning from that? All the food that we consume, there is risk in it. The same thing as when they say, don't eat honey when you're pregnant because there's a potential risk of something. Or, there's always yes, there's risk. Sometimes we do get food poisoning. Why did it become with milk specifically a thing where they're well, raw milk itself is so dangerous? Why is it so dangerous? What's the thing that they're so scared of that pasteurization and homogenization get rid of? Can you explain that a little bit?
So I think probably a lot of what it comes down to is, unfortunately, that industrialized agriculture necessarily is dirtier than traditional agrarian societies who looked after their animals. So animal welfare is a lower thing. Animals are sicker, so they're fed more antibiotics. So the animals' immune systems are lower. So there's going to be more contamination, more bacterial concentration and nasty stuff in their own milk because it comes from their immune systems to their milk. That's how our mother's milk also confers benefit to us. We get bacteria from her system to ours. And also then the milking parlours, the industrialization of things means you've got scale. Scale means more people need to look at the things, need to address the more risks, essentially more hazard threats. Whereas if you have our first raw milk suppliers, Crawford's, when I went to visit them, I was like, where's the milking parlour? She's like, you're in it. I was like, well, this is a tiny shed. And she's like, yes, only 3 cattle come in here. You're like, what? And then, over the period of years, they went from 3 to 8 to 10. And I believe maybe they're milking off 12 or 13 this year. But that's the scale. You talk about industrial scale agriculture where they have milking parlours with automated milking machines. They have to bleach the lines each time they produce them because of the fact that there is such high bacterial contamination, because there is so many risks, because there's no natural health kind of supports in place, which there would be in an organic traditional agrarian system.
So just to clarify that, you're saying that the actual cows, the process of raising the cows, what they're eating, how their life is much more unhealthy now as well. So then if you're taking raw milk from those kinds of cows, which have been pumped full of antibiotics and fed, not grass-fed, not animal pasture raised, then there's going to be a much higher chance of contamination within there. Anyway, plus the places where they are being milked necessarily just has so much more bacteria because there's a bigger thoroughfare cows as well.
Exactly. So then pasteurization came along. They're like, okay, well, we can heat this milk to close to boiling point and we can just kill all the bacteria. And then we bottle it, and it means it can have a longer shelf life. If it has a longer shelf life, it can go further. It means economies of scale can kick in because these big farms can sell their milk over much broader areas. And essentially that's the model for the kind of domination model for mass agriculture, right? So it's not like me selling to the guy who I know down the street, or me selling at the farm gate, or me selling at the farmer's market. It's me dealing with a monster, essentially bringing my herd of 200 cattle in, milking them twice a day, that milk going into big steel vats that have been sterilized twice a day, then that milk going down these lines into these big dairy trucks that haul it off to a co-op, that co-op then packing it down into Avonmore packs or whatever the hell it is, Premier Dairies or wherever you get your milk is, and then that getting distributed to all of the supermarkets nationwide. And you can think even the time involved in that process, the potential contamination risks, all that sort of stuff means that there's no way raw milk can sit inside that process. I know the farmers I get the raw milk from, they deliver direct to me. I deliver direct to a couple of customers. And that's how food systems, when they really work, when traditional food systems really work, and maybe they get brought up to date in certain ways, you know, you've used some technology, but you're still going by this kind of like, okay, locavore system. Like, you can't do world domination with that. And that's the natural self-limiting fact of nature, which I kind of love, you know?
Yeah, so and I imagine also what happened was when people suddenly started saying, oh, people are getting ill from raw dairy when dairy was raw, it was because populations had exploded, industrialization had started to come in, and more people were living in cities farther away from those farms. And so that milk was having to travel further and longer before it got to people. And so necessarily it was spoiling quicker. So the chances of bacteria were bigger anyway. And also, you know, cleanliness standards were different, right? They didn't know as much. So everything wasn't as clean. You know, they didn't understand those things. Whereas now when we're looking at raw milk, we're looking at that small scale still. We're looking at people really understanding soil health, their cow's health, but you're also looking at the cleanliness factor. And then, like you said, they're getting it to people much quicker. So it's quite a different animal, literally, than it was back then.
Yeah, exactly that. And pasteurization also came in with the hygiene hypothesis. So this notion that bacteria was bad, that bacteria were the source of disease, is not wrong in case of some infections, but the thought that all bacteria cause disease is totally wrong. And now we know so much more, but the fact that we're still applying pasteurization in a world where we understand the microbiome, as in the microbiome on our skin, in our eyes, in our brains, in our nose, in our mouth, in our gut, all over the place. Every surface we touch is covered with bacteria. And when it's healthy bacteria, it manages itself. It's when it goes to, you know, scales of industrialized agriculture, that's when you have problems, because that's when you can get a big pathogenic infection and something can really take hold and cause mass disease and mass panic, I guess.
So it's a bit like when during COVID we suddenly had to sterilize everything. Everyone sterilized everything in their hands,
their newspapers,
the food packaging, everything. And then suddenly, once that was over, we'd destroyed so much of the natural bacteria that we were in contact with in our environment that when it was over, we all just started getting sick every time we encountered any kind of bacteria all the time, and everyone's immune systems were shot. Is that kind of similar to like raw milk and the natural bacteria that would have been in it that was repopulating the gut and making everything all nice, really healthy, really natural, coming maybe in from your local environment, versus like standardized, homogenized milk that doesn't have any of those lovely cultures that are doing the things?
Yeah, there's cultures in a few places that are causing those things. I guess the thing to maybe consider, or there's a handy kind of like analogy for this, is to look at MRSA. So MRSA is methicillin-resistant Staphylococcus aureus. That is to say methicillin, which is a type of antibiotic-resistant version of Staphylococcus aureus, which is a natural bacteria that is in our bodies at some level, that's in lots of bits of food, and that can cause food poisoning if it gets, you know, out of hand, and can also, in the case of MRSA, usually it's the case that it infects people. It's a hospital-acquired infection because hospitals use so many antibiotics that it infects a bed sore or an ulcer, usually on the skin, and then causes like really big problems where people have to be pumped full of intravenous antibiotics, and you have to use multiple dose antibiotics that then have to, like, you know, to clean the system entirely. So the body's own natural defenses are very low. And MRSA came from an environment of field hospitals in war zones, like I think it was Iraq originally in 1993, where MRSA emerged, where the field hospitals are not clean places, right? So they're just like a tent in a desert, and there's just guys being brought in with broken bits on them, and they're having to treat them, cut bits off them, put them back together, and they're using lots of antibiotics in those situations. And when you get this kind of pressure on the bacteria to evolve under this, so it's like antibiotic pressure that creates this amazing resistance. And so same thing when it comes to the bacteria in the milk that are like non-pasteurized milk and the bacteria in our gut. If we have a potentially, like a person who's taken lots of antibiotics, so their own gut doesn't have the same like natural levels of immune mediation going on that is enhanced by that bacterial balance, they've got like less gut cultures, less strain diversity in their gut, they're much more vulnerable if they have a little bit of listeria that's going to be, you know, very low load, but like it might not hurt me or you, but in that person that's had lots of antibiotics and that's very vulnerable, it can then cause serious food poisoning, potential hospitalization, potential death. So that's the thing. It's like, it's not what for you isn't for me and vice versa. We have to each assess our environment based on our own capabilities and vulnerabilities.
And so if people have decided, like, actually, you know, like they are in loads of different situations, they want to go back to growing their own vegetables, they want to only eat organic, they want to try and go back to kind of old school animal husbandry or plant growing or like ancestral ways of eating, and they're like, actually, raw milk's the way for me. why would they be doing that? Like, what are the noticeable benefits and who can that really serve?
Okay, so I think it can serve most people as long as, like I say, they're kind of like adhering to the kind of the care guidelines, let's say, around their own system and how much they can take. And, you know, if you're just starting down a raw milk journey, be very careful, of course, like any introduction of any new food. And the raw milk does contain necessarily bacteria. And the bacterial probiotic part of it is probably the least interesting aspect of raw milk. The bit that people go on about the most, but I think it's probably the least like consequential for our health. But it's there, and the bacterial balance inside the milk is what's preventing the food spoilage for as long as it does, like 4 or 5 days, and then forget it. That milk is gone off. Like, it won't sit on your counter like a pasteurized dairy will. But the benefits are, for most people, as long as they're careful with it, I think probably the biggest benefits are in things like the sulfur compounds that are in there, the undamaged protein. So when you pasteurize, you essentially misfold proteins. So you cause a breakdown or denaturing of these proteins that are like very careful structures. Like, if you look at proteins, protein folding is bonkers. Like, it's weird kind of biology that I don't understand a lot of, to be perfectly honest with you. But they're very, very carefully arranged structures, and each protein looks very slightly different. All the like chains and chains of amino acids. And when you heat those things, they denature. And denatured proteins are really damaging for our health, whereas whole proteins that aren't denatured, our body's like, oh, this is brilliant. I fully understand this, and there's no work for me to do to make it safe. And it means that I get a volume of protein in a very bioavailable source. Also, you have lots of natural sulfur. Like I was saying, sulfur compounds, I think probably they're the most undersung of all of the potential food groups. And also, you know, they're not a vitamin or a mineral, so they're not written on the sides of packs of food. But sulfur compounds, there is a school of thought that says that we might be actually more sulfur-based compounds than we are carbon-based life forms, not compounds. So if we're sulfur-based life forms, what does that mean? Essentially, it means that sulfur is involved in every stage of our metabolism. So it's in every, like, sulfur compounds like MSM, essentially, methylsulfonylmethane, which is what you find in raw milk, as well as lots of other sulfur compounds, sulforaphanes, and these sorts of things we find in broccoli sprout juice, and, you know, the sorts of things you hear about around anti-inflammatory benefits for broccoli sprout juice. The same thing applies to your raw milk. Sulfur compounds are very vulnerable to heating, and when they're in a good state, when they're not broken down, sulfur compounds help to support liver detoxification. They help to support DNA replication. They're part of like each of the chains of our genetic structure. They form parts of our cell wall. They form parts of all our structural tissues, so our tendons, our ligaments, our new bone growth, all of those things. Sulfur compounds are like vital for kind of everything. Like I was saying, we might just be sulfur-based life forms. So that's two big things. The third one is fatty acids. But I would say pretty much raw milk, like, it's all seasonal, right? So we get raw milk when the cows are out in pasture. We don't get raw milk in the wintertime because those cows are getting fat and feeding their kids. And then there's a big period where they're just feeding their babies. These babies are not robbed from their mothers at 2 days old. This is not, you know, don't listen to that propaganda. That doesn't apply to this type of dairy. This is dairy where these people care about their cows. They're cows with pet names. They really are like part of the family. And so the calves that are born into those systems, the calves stay with their mums for ages because the owners, the farmers, really understand the value of the dairy that those calves are getting from their mothers, colostrum, etc. So so essentially the fatty acids that are in that dairy when the cows are gone out to grass, you get a lot of omega-3 fats in there. You get a lot of short chain fats. So you get caprylic acid. You get like all sorts of really good stuff. So you get like a big balance of omega-3, 6, 7, 9, short chain fat, long chain fatty acids, all the good stuff. And those things feed our gut, feed good bacteria in our gut, like butyrate feeds our good bacteria in our gut. You have, and also feeds the immune system in the gut. Omega-3 fats, we know, reduce inflammation. They feed our brain. Every cell wall, every cell membrane in our body is based on those omega-3s. So DHA is like a structural compound in every cell membrane. So it's very hard to like stop me talking about the benefits of raw milk. There's also vitamin K. Vitamin K is probably the last one maybe to focus on. Vitamin K is a really interesting one because we always thought it was like, it was the clotting factor. So very dangerous if we had a risk of clotting. So that was something that we would be like, don't get too much vitamin K. Whereas it's being kind of discovered now that vitamin K modulates clotting. And there's lots of different types of vitamin K. There's like something like 7, 9, maybe 12 forms of vitamin K in existence. And the types of vitamin K that you're going to get in your raw dairy will help to regulate blood clotting, also bone strength, also immune system health, also Vitamin K assists in the metabolism of other fat-soluble antioxidants as well. So like things like vitamin D and vitamin A. It supports eye health, like so many things. So there's so many benefits. I guess the thing is that what everyone talks about, which I haven't even mentioned yet, is calcium. Calcium and phosphorus. Yes, they're really, dairy and raw dairy are really great sources of calcium and of phosphorus, which are two really critical minerals for bone health. But yeah, there's lots of calcium in lots of other parts of our diet. So I don't go bonkers about dairy for calcium. And I don't freak mothers out if their kids aren't taking dairy or there's an allergy to dairy in their family. I think the thing is that if there's a potential allergy to dairy, something to definitely explore, and maybe this is a topic for another podcast, is look at the A1 and A2 protein. Different herds, different breeds of cattle have different types of proteins in their milk. The type A1 protein seems to be more allergenic than type A2 protein. So a good idea for those parents or just people in general who are experiencing maybe allergic symptoms like maybe stuffy sinuses from drinking milk or, more digestive issues, rather than cutting milk out altogether, if they want to keep drinking it, maybe they could explore looking for A2 protein milk, which is what we have from the cattle that provide the dairy that comes into our shop in raw milk form.
So basically, raw milk it's a bit like choosing organic vegetables versus like mass-produced, heavily sprayed, glyphosate sprayed, bad soil vegetables, because what you're getting is much more of the natural vitamins and minerals and all the good stuff that would naturally be in milk than you would do if it was pasteurized or homogenized, right?
That's it.
And homogenization is also a problem in and of itself, isn't it? There's quite a lot of links there. That's something for people to look into themselves, but the homogenization process and the separating of the fats can also be problematic for our hearts and loads of different other things. So every time we mess with a natural state thing and add in some kind of a process and process it in some kind of a way is often some kind of a problem that comes from that, right? It's like necessarily usually not as good for us.
Exactly. I think exactly that. Like industrialized food, if I'm in a war zone and there's no way to get good food and fresh food locally to me, then yes, it's great because it stabilizes the food that's there and provides some base nutrition level. But if I'm looking at health and optimal health, which I am, that is my job and also what I love to do for myself and love to help people around me to do that, I'm always going to look for what's the best. And what's the best? Raw milk is definitely the best. Raw organic milk specifically. Like you say, glyphosate-free, pesticide-free, antibiotic-free. I just want less crap, And I think the thing is that when we look at studies around these things, glyphosate, other insecticides or pesticides, antibiotic trace residue stuff in dairy, like these things are all, they have like maximum permitted safe levels by the European Food Safety Authority, right? So that's regulated. The problem is that every single one of those studies is a single intervention study. So they said, oh yeah, cool. So glyphosate, well, actually, they haven't said about glyphosate yet. They're still just extending the testing terms, my arse. They're just going to keep extending the testing parameters, and glyphosate is in everything anyway. And they'll go, oh, well, you can just use glyphosate now. But yeah, so basically the trace levels that they establish as safe for any insecticide, pesticide residue, whatever in food, heavy metals, whatever it is, it's a single intervention study that looks at that one intervention. Did people survive based on that level? They did. So it's cool. So we go to that level and then it'll be fine. But the problem is that people are consuming hundreds, if not thousands of these compounds every day in their daily diet. They're breathing them in. They're putting them on their skin. The stuff is everywhere. So for me, reducing immune load is obvious. And like, we look at all the emergence of these chronic diseases. We look at, oh my God, cancer has gone insane. With heart disease is insane. Diabetes is insane. All sorts of neurological degenerative diseases gone in, like out of nowhere. It's not out of nowhere. It's so obvious where it's come from, really, honestly. The technology is part of it, but there's just so much in our environment that's toxic to us, our human system. It's going to take us 1,000 years before we've genetically adapted to this environment. We're not going to be around long enough to work that out. We just have to start to reverse some of these bad decisions we've made and just admit to ourselves, okay, like just try something else, because clearly nature is telling us this is not the way.
Yeah, and it's simplification in every sense, isn't it? It's like we know instinctively that when we are living a life that's close to us, we're in our garden, getting our feet in the soil, growing our own vegetables. We know how we made them. We know what's in our soil. We know what we put on them. We know how long they've been since we took them from the ground to our fridge. So we don't need a best before date. We know, and we're making that choice ourselves. We raise our own cow outside. We looked after it. We know whether it was sick or it wasn't sick. We know to trust ourselves that we milked it ourselves. that milk can be good. We put it in our fridge. We know what date it came. We know what date it goes on. All of those things are just common sense things, right? And of course, not all of us can have our own back garden with a cow and a chicken and all of our vegetables. People need to run the country and make money and do all these things. And it's just like, how in as many choices as possible, if we can go back to the most simple, the least steps between the food chain and us, the least processing between the food chain and us, the least stuff that went into the animal or the vegetable before it gets to us, the better that's going to be for our body. And raw milk is just another one of those obvious choices if you're going to be eating dairy.
Exactly. Boom. I think you've said it absolutely perfectly. So on that note, if you guys have comments or questions, post them below. We're interested to see. I mean, we're not the oracle when it comes to food or the oracle when it comes to health. So what do you guys think? Do you think raw milk is a good idea or a bad idea? Have you got experiences using raw milk? Are you actually farmers of raw milk? Get in touch with us. Let us know your thoughts, comments, etc. Please also like and subscribe. It really is value to us when we see more subscribers coming in, because it allows us to do more of this type of content and hopefully provide you guys with more useful health information.
If people are in Ireland and they're like, raw milk, that's for me, I'm going out to get some tomorrow, where can they get it, and what are the producers that you know of that you'd like to shout out about? Okay, amazing. So we deal with Glanbuie, amazing producer to the west of Ireland. We deal with Crawford's Raw Milk in Limerick. We used to deal with Fermoy Raw Milk, but Frank has gone hyper local, I believe. And that's the same with a lot of good producers. They're like, no, I'm not delivering to Dublin anymore. You might be an hour and a half away from my door, but that's too far. So cool, fine. I mean, I understand that. Those are great producers. And yeah, I mean, there's more on the scene. There's lots more we don't know. There's lots more producing just at the farm gate, like we were talking about, like people who are maybe producing 30 litres a week, like really small amounts. That's not enough to get to little old Hopsack. So yeah, but you can buy online from us. We can try to ship to you nationwide. Wherever you are, we will get you your raw milk needs sorted. Okay, that was a good chat. I feel converted to dairy. Raw dairy, that's it. I'm going to try it. Boom. It just remains to say thank you very much to our sponsors, Clearlight Saunas. Clearlight have been an absolute godsend to us in terms of me and my eczema and you and skin health and all these sorts of amazing things. Fundamental to energy production is red light. Red light is the thing that for the first hour and the last hour of sunlight, it's what our bodies are receiving from the sun. But the problem is we're all indoors. We're not really receiving that red light that the nature wants to give us. And so Clearlight saunas are a great way for you to help to get red light into your body in a beautiful, like spa-like environment. I'm so lucky to have one in my garden. It was the best investment in health I ever made. It is my health insurance policy. If you come to us, we'll be able to put you in touch with Clearlight. We'll be able to give you sauna guides, let you know how we use them, our favorite things to do with sauna, and a bit of the giddy science as well that, you know, I'm always involved in. So come talk to us. A hefty discount. €300 discount, no less. Oh, yeah. Come and talk to us about Clearlight Saunas. Okay. And also going to the wanderinginto-wellness-project.com if you want to work with us personally. We also work individually with clients if you can take the amount of contact that we want to give you. So we're not into like one and done consult and run away. We want to partner you guys on your road to health. So if you are up for that, if you're game for that, if you're ready to make changes in your life, come to the wanderinginto-wellness-project.com. You can also shop our merch there. You can find more about our podcast, etc., etc. I think that's about it. That is it. Thank you so much for listening, and we'll see you soon. Bye.